Thank you all for the invitation. And I just want to say congrats to the inductees of the new Sigma Tau Delta English Honor Society. So congrats, y'all. And, just hearing a little bit of what it takes to get in there. Congrats again on hitting those requirements. And I think you get to get over like a 3.0, so that's awesome. I'm just going to read a few poems. And so I always like to start with this piece. And so it's a poem for my wife. And when we were commuting, pre-COVID to work, to and from work together, we have like it's supposed to be a 30-minute commute, but it becomes an hour with rush hour. And so, part of it's good because after work, we can debrief, kind of like just unload our day on each other. And so one of the things though, my wife loves to talk. And to give you some idea, like I'll pick her up from work. She's at her office is like 5 minutes from mine. So I'll pick her up from work and I say, hey, how was your day? And like she's gone, on about the day. And like I said, we have an hour-long commute, or commute that's an hour long because of rush hour. So just to give you some idea of how she loves to talk. And usually it's like in the remaining 15 minutes of the commute, she's like, oh, I'm sorry. How was your day? And so usually, when that happens, like, and she knows this, like I've admitted it to her, I kind of go on autopilot. And so like listening, but not fully listening, just listening enough just to register the right emotional things. So kind of like, oh, okay, all right. And so, and I know a lot of us do that when, someone's talking to us and we're just not in that mental space to talk. But the autopilot gets really bad when I'm hungry. And so, the poem I'm going to start off with is, my wife once asked me, where do I go when I'm here, but not here? And so, this is the piece. I wanted bananas, a bunch of them, spooned body to body like small yellow kayaks. So I missed what you said about the war in Libya. When you say Gaddafi, I think of how they spoil if they sit too long on their wicker thrones. We're in my car, listening to WTOP. We passed the Spanish market that calls what I love plátanos. Just saying plata, my tongue snaps like the slingshot's elastic strip, hurling A's like stones. You complain about the weak radio signal. I could nod and punctuate your frustrations with hums, as if I'm listening, as if my head weren't full of hunger's SOS. I could pretend that the radio static is annoying, as if the sizzling sound it makes doesn't have me thinking of sweet, chunky rumba slices frying in my mother's skillet, or plantains boiled whole with dasheen, dumplings, and potatoes to eat with saltfish and coconut bake, plates and plates of large bananas, edible boomerangs, nature's golden sugar-filled tusk, the moon's waning frown, or waxing smile. So I will just kind of jump around, and I read from a book that came out in 2016, Point Blank. So I'm going to be reading mostly now from the new manuscript, and the manuscript is with the forthcoming chapbook I have from Plan B Press. So uh, if you're a parent, this next poem is for you. So this is called How It Feels. When your mother-in-law takes your daughter out of her crib after the crying, after you said she's not hungry because she threw up, after you told her your daughter rocks to sleep easy but cries when you put her back, when your child's grandmother takes her out after you told her not to, you remember the rose bush you and your wife chopped down, the one that blocked the living room window that bullied away sunlight. And you know this grandmother's stubborn love for her grandchild gashes your authority. The way the thorny bush prickled your hand, arms, and legs, and its bold resistance, its open disregard for what you wanted. No one tells you parenting is like gardening, where you defend your choices from parasites posing as unwarranted advice, where insecurities bred by judgment and condescension can brown your confidence. When you watch your mother in law holding your child after you told her not to, you know how your wife felt that first night home from the hospital when your parents came by and could only seem to unload their criticisms on how she handled her child. And if compassion's a deep sorrow for others' misfortune, do you forgive the know it all grandparents their transgressions, how they selectively forget their mistakes? Isn't humility an ingredient of compassion, the one that asked the grandparents to see themselves as they once were, green in their new role? You remember your parents fumbling in the dark of what they didn't understand, how their trial and error traumatized your childhood, how it pushed your brother into a homeless shelter and his mental illness, your brother spiraling in his orbit of pain, light years away from forgiveness. When your child's grandmother takes her out of her crib, you take your child back. Say, I love you, but I got this. All right, so next poem. So these next two poems are about and thank you to the folks in the chat. um, these next two poems are, I'm going to read them together because they are about a moment my wife and I went through a couple years ago. And the poems are self-explanatory, so I'm not gonna, not gonna really jump into like the backstory of them. I mean, they pretty much explain themselves. So I'm just gonna jump into where. Okay, here it is. Oh goodness. Okay, here it is. Beacon. An intern asked, "Aren't you scared?" And you remember the hospital clerk saying what you're doing is courageous. You do what you have to for your wife whose life is leashed to a box, cleaning her blood before spooling back into her body. It does what it has to because her kidneys can't. And weren't they courageous standing their ground before lupus took them out? Its gluttony left you scratching your head, lost in this new life, the one that marks you donor and your wife recipient, the one where the transplant centers another turf to navigate, this life where words like renal failure and nephrectomy seizing your new tongue. You watch your wife sleep while the machine chimes and beeps, remembering the intern's question. Of course, there were moments that gobbled your bravery to a morsel. The emergency room visits, lupus nearly taking her out. And isn't she the courageous one? How she welcomes each day, even those where grief is the overcast sky. Those moments when the only light is her heroic heart, blazing these dark streets, winding beyond the mysterious and unknown. So that poem was written, if you get the gist of the poem, it's, was written, when my wife and I got the news about her needing a transplant. And so that was before the surgery. And this next poem I'm going to read is after the surgery. And then in this poem too, so I think the poem says it, but I wanted to donate directly to my wife. And luckily, after they ran several blood tests and all this stuff, they realized that we weren't a direct match. So we had to go on another route. We went through what's called the kidney exchange. So even though my wife and I weren't a direct match, I was able to donate to my match in the kidney exchange, and as a result, she got a kidney right away from her match in the kidney exchange. So this is Into the Light. You're a floor below me, healing in your room. Both of us soar from the divine puppetry of science. God pulling the surgeon strings, sliding the kidney from inside me, routing it to its new body in Connecticut. And wasn't he present in the hands deft dance and how hope lit the operating room like a stage? Your new kidney ready for its debut inside you, having traveled in a freight of prayers, 17 hours from Minneapolis to DC. Didn't our road here seem even longer, not being a direct match? The hiccup in lab results, us hurling our names into an exchange pool deep with uncertainty. And here we are, in our beds, an elevator ride from each other. This moment, like the 90-degree day beyond our windows, the cloudless sky, shadows receding in the sunlight. Thank you. So I'm gonna jump again into another poem for parents. For any parents out there who are currently going through what I'm going through in this poem, or I went through this with the 4-year-old, and now I'm going through this with our 6-month-old. So this is called Stride, and it's for my brother-in-law Tolu. And it opens with a quote and the epigraph. So the quote is, when you run the marathon, you run against the distance, not against the other runners and not against the time. And that's a quote from Haile Gebrselassie. And so this poem is called Stride. And again, it's from my brother-in-law, Tolu. I don't remember when it happened, he says. All I know is one day Eli put himself to bed. You watch your brother-in-law with an envy you haven't felt since you were 16, when you learned your little brother lost his virginity before you. You remember feeling like he crossed the finish line before you started the race. Your brother far beyond the horizon of that milestone. You're just as far behind your brother-in-law, wishing you could breeze the distance to him in this full marathon called parenting. Even now, he's disappearing from your field of vision as he goes on about his kids sleeping in their rooms, while your 3-year-old holds your bedtime hostage, demanding another story, crying and jumping when you say it's sleepy time. She's taking over your California king, doing mixed martial arts in her sleep. The toddler with the elbow and knee strikes, with the jabs and overhand punches. Your bonnet donning pajama kid. Test your limits when each sleepless night leaves you like a runner at mile 20, hunched over, gasping, glinting with sweat, muscles blazing. But this is just the starting line of a long distance test of patience. It's how your parents must have felt, especially your poor dad. It couldn't have been easy being the only foreigner at the job, trading barbs with the other black electricians who riffed on his accent and the extra shit he got from the white foreman. It couldn't have been easy trying to keep it together, verbally sparring with guys he was smarter than, then coming home to your attitude. How many times you almost broke his patience when he nearly came out of himself to give you a piece of his mind. Luckily, he never broke his stride. If you learned anything from him, it's enjoying small victories, even in the moments that seem hard. It's a lesson your brother-in-law takes in strides. His stories about his kids are his way of coaching you to keep running. Okay, so I want to again thank you all for listening. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to close out with this newish poem, and this poem is for my now 6 month old. And thank you, Deborah, and thank you to the folks in the chat. Thanks for the encouragement. So this final poem is for my now 6 month old daughter and George Floyd. Believe it or not, they both fit in this poem. So this is called The Land of Innocence. A YouTube clip shows a protest ignited after police killed George Floyd, torched SUVs, overturned cop cars, armored officers retreating. All of that sinks my wife into a deeper postpartum, having made it through our personal crisis. We watched the python of despair coil itself around America, blowing out glass storefronts and colliding angry bodies as the tension constricts and crushes. We're miles from the mayhem, but a different kind of danger finds us in the maternity ward. A decreasing heartbeat, frenzied nurses rushing my wife to the OR, surgeons scrambling to save our daughter. Watching the news, I'm reminded of slogans on chaos as necessity. Real discoveries come from chaos. Chaos is beautiful and full of fertility. But when it's a violent pattern of reactions, what's the real discovery? Where's the beauty in things shattered and tagged if the same pattern of injustice ripples our lives? Maybe chaos isn't the right word. Let's try instead challenge. And since it means refuting the truth or validity of, isn't a protest a public dispute of someone else's truth? Like the one about the fear of dark bodies, how it justifies us being mangled or discredited in news cycles. Wouldn't the beauty then be new laws that get us closer to becoming the people the Constitution claims it protects? Let me begin again. When my wife told me several months ago she was pregnant, we knew the challenge of this birth could take her life, just as the challenge in the hospital threatened our daughters. And isn't it an act of faith to go blindfolded into the future and be delighted by the light there? Now we're lit by a dancing star named Jade, short for Jadesola, which in Yoruba means come into wealth. She's jade like the green stone said to emit wisdom and clarity. I'm feeding her while watching the YouTube video. Someone on screen yells, "We're better than this." And she squeals, mouth dripping with her mother's milk, smiling while dreaming her baby dreams. That land of innocence, where it all starts before we lose our way back, rationalizing our destruction. Thank you again.